begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning. Sure to thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating the Suburban this month in honor of their grandchildren. May they grow to become the best version of themselves. The Daf Yomi Shir and the refuah shleima for Yehuda Ben Michal. May he, together with Kol Chole Yisrael, experience a complete and enduring refuah. Our week of learning sponsors, Jeff and Karen Cohn, in commemoration of the Yahrzeit of Karen's mother, Clara Oxman, Zichron Livracha. Our day of learning sponsors, Sherry and Alan Steinmetz, commemorating the Yahrzeit of Alan's grandfather, Simcha ben Yitchak Aiyzik, and in honor of Allison and Adam's return. Baruch haba to Adam after a sabbatical. A little sabbatical, a life sabbatical. Baruch Hashem, Baruch haba, welcome back. Welcome back. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Mark and Elsa Lustman, in commemoration of the Yahrzeit of Mark's mother, Anne Lustman, Chana Rachel Bas Avraham Alter Zichron Livracha, and Adam and Allison Steinmetz for the refuah shleima for Moshe Ruvain Ben Sima Taiblo. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, all of the neshamos will have an aliyah, and all the families in Nechama, and all of those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Chole Yisrael. But so with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Mem Gimel 43. We are picking up on Mem Beis Amud Beis. So the truth is, we left off not so far down from the middle of the daf. We'll actually pick up today in Meretz Hashem. Amar Rava, Amar Rava, Hi Milsa. We did this. It's about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. About 24 lines up from the bottom. So Amar Rava, Hi Milsa Kashay, but we read this part. Hi Milsa Kashay by Rabbi Rav Yosef, Esrim et Hartin Shnin, Velo Ifrik Ad Yosef Rav Yosef Bereisho Pirka. So I'll say, so remember again, we were dealing with the following question. This was the Esvei. Right, Reb Shimon brought up. Reb Shimon said that halacha l'maisa, in a case, it's actually quoting the Mishnah, in a case where halacha l'maisa, let's go back for just a moment. In the Mishnah, we were dealing with at what point in time does the father become entitled to the collections if his daughter was violated or seduced. So we had the Tanakama, the Rabbanan in the Mishnah, who essentially said that as long as the father was alive at the start of the judicial proceedings, even if he dies before the verdict is reached, ultimately the compensation package, we'll call it, belongs to him. Reb Shimon said everything is dependent on gevia, collection. If the father died before collecting anything, then lamaisa, the award, so to speak, belongs to the daughter. So remember again, the Gemara said, why is that? The Gemara said, halacha lamaisa, if we believe that ultimately a monetary award from a bezin is considered to be like mammon, not like knas, then halacha lamaisa, it should pass through to the brothers. So that's the question. So the Gemara now says, this question stood for 22 years. While Rabba was the head of the yeshiva, it stood for 22 years until halacha lamaisa, until Rav Yosef became the Rosh Yeshiva, Upirka. And Rabbi Yosef answered the shaila. Now, boss, remember again, I did it a little bit quickly towards the end of the shir, but it was quite beautiful and profound. Rashi spoke about the difference between the leadership styles, or not even leadership styles, the knowledge levels of Rabba and Rav Yosef. Right? Rabba was known as an Oker Harim. Rabba was known ultimately, again, as someone who uprooted mountains, which means intense analytical skill. Rav Yosef was known as a Sinai. And Sinai means encyclopedic knowledge. So I will say Rabba was a Rosh Yeshiva for 22 years. The issue was that halacha l'maisa, when Rav Yosef became the Rosh Yeshiva, people had doubts. They weren't sure if he would be a proper memala makom, if he would be a proper replacement. So the Rebbe Shalom gave him incredible siyata d'shmaya, his first day on the job, and he was able to go ahead and answer this question that was outstanding for 22 years, which is really quite exceptional and incredible. So again, let's say there's so much more to talk about with the Sinai versus Oker Harim, which is considered to be a higher level. The Gemara debates this. At the end of the day, the Gemara essentially answers that halacha l'maisa, you need both. In other words, you need the ability to analyze, But again, a person also needs to have, you also need people who possess this voluminous amount of knowledge. So Rav Yosef comes along and answers, Shiny Hasan the Amakra, V'nasana isha shochiv imad la'avia na'ara chamishim kesef. The Torah says, and the man who slept with the girl will give to her father 50 silver pieces. Lo zichsa Torah la'av ela mishas nesina. So also what's interesting to note is, the Torah uses the lashon of v'nasan. V'nasan. And what does v'nasan tell you? That the father does not really go ahead and acquire anything until it is literally given to him. Mishas nesina. So this is Reb Shimon's raya, that a father does not become entitled to the awards, ultimately again, until they are actually given to him. And when Rabbah said that after a Beis Din awards the money, it's turned into mammon. And ultimately, again, it's inherited by the sons. That's with other knasos. So I'll say what's interesting over here is, it turns out what the Gemara is essentially answering is that ones and mafuta are different. They're different, and halacha l'maisa, they do not become the property of the father until the father quite literally takes possession of them. Elmiata. But if that's the case, gabe evedich siv kesef shloshim shkalim yitain la'adonav hachenami lo zichsa Torah la'adon el mishas nesina. To which the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, I can say the same thing by Eved. They both say, what's the halacha? We've made reference to this already a number of times. If my shar kills Ruvain's Eved, so the Torah says there's a penalty payment of 30 shkalim. 30 shkalim. Now the Torah also uses lashon of yitain. So I should say also that ultimately, again, that does not become the property of the person until it's actually given over. To which the Gemara says, no. Yitain lachud v'nasan lachud. So apparently the Gemara says there's the lashon of yitain versus the lashon of v'nasan. So apparently, again, yitain really just refers to a general entitlement. V'nasan means it only becomes yours after you take possession. Ihachi, tamud lomer v'kichesh, tamud lomer v'nasan. By the way, if that's the case, when the Gemara said before that the drush was based on v'kichesh, that's not really true. It's really based on v'nasan. Amarava ki itzrich v'kichesh kigon sha'amda badin ubagra umesa. Rava says you're right. Rava says this is referencing back to yesterday's daf. When do we use the lashon the drasha of v'kichesh? That's in a case of where they began the judicial proceeding. Sha'amda badin ubagra, she became bogeres umesa, and she died. The hasam kiyaris aviha mina dida kayaris. In that case, when the father inherits, because the daughter has now died, ultimately, again, he's inheriting from her. Ihachi, because she became bogeres. Ihachi, yatsu ila shehem kinas. Mamonu. If that's the case, then why did the Brisa say before, excluded are these cases? Must remember again, this was the whole list that we had at the bottom of Amud Aleph yesterday. Why are we saying that ultimately, again, they're excluded because they're knas? It's not because it's knas, it's mamon. Amr Nachman bar Yitzchak, yatsu elu sheikaran knas. Rav Nachman says what the Brisa meant to say is that although these items can morph into mamon, in their essence, they are knas. Fine. Esvei, Rabbi Shimon Poter, She'enu Mashalim Knas Al Pi Atzmo. Well, this is going back now to yesterday's daf. Remember again, yesterday we had two different kinds of cases of where the father confronted, remember again, Shimon confronted Reuven and said to Reuven, you went ahead and you violated my daughter. Remember again, Reuven went ahead and denied those claims, denied it, swore to the fact that he did not do it, and then what? And then admitted the fact that he had done it. So the Gemara says over here, Reb Shimon Poter. Now, Reb Shimon said that halacha l'maisa in a case where Reuven went ahead and denied that he had violated Shimon's daughter, swears to that effect, and then admits it, Reb Shimon says that he's pater. But remember again, this position of Reb Shimon. Why does Reb Shimon say he's pater? When we say pater, by the way, remember what's at play in these cases? What's at play? So remember again, we've got, let's say it's a case of ones. So we've got tsar, boshes, pigam, kinas, right? And now what? Karen, right? And asham gzelos. Reb Shimon says, you're pater from everything. What's Reb Shimon's logic? Why? She'enu mashalim kinas al pi atzmo. Ultimately, again, because halacha l'maisa, because when Reuven goes ahead and admits that he went ahead and that he violated Shimon's daughter, he's being Moda B'Knas, and as we've established, Moda B'Knas Potter. To which the Gemara says, TALMUD Amad B'Dinu. So the reason is because ultimately, again, there was no Din Torah. Ha'amad B'Din, I will say because this is case number one. Ha'amad B'Din, Mishalim Apiatzmo, Karban Shvua. Sorry, Ha'amad B'Din, the Mishalim Apiatzmo. But again, had there been a judicial proceedings, where then I will say again, because now we're working under the assumption that after Beis Din awards the money to Shimon, right, to the father of the girl, so the money is transformed into what? Into mamon. It's no longer kinas. Ultimately, again, in that case, the mishalim al piatzmo, karban shvua nami mechayiv. Ultimately, you'd also be chayiv a karban shvua. But I will say again, but Reb Shimon himself said that even, I will say, remember again, what was case number two? Case number two in yesterday's brisa was, Shimon confronts Ruvain, you violated my daughter, and what? That was part one. And we went to Beis Din, and Beis Din found you guilty. Right? Ruvain says, never happened, swore to that effect. Then Ruvain admits that he did something wrong. It appears that even in that case, Reb Shimon says that you're still pater. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Reb Shimon was saying, according to the Reb Shimon was trying to reason with the Rabbanon. How so? He said like this. So I will say, now this is going to become very interesting. Rabbi Shimon holds that in both of these cases, Ruvain is going to be pater, right? Let's take a step back here for just a moment. Case number one, right? We had two cases in yesterday's brisa. Case number one, Shimon comes over to Ruvain. What does he say? You violated my daughter, right? Ruvain says, no, I didn't, right? And Ruvain swears to that effect. I did not. Then what happens? Ruvain admits that he violated the girl. What's Reb Shimon's position? Reb Shimon says, pater. Pater from what? Everything. Tsar, Boshes, Pegam, Ripoy, and Chomesh, and Asham Gzelos, right? In Shvuah, Asham Gzelos. Right? So pater from everything. Why? Because Rabbi Shimon holds that ultimately this is a case of Moda B'Knas. Case number two, same thing, except Ruvain adds in one more piece to his claim, which is, we went to Beis Din and you were found guilty. Rabbi Shimon says, I hold, even in that case, Ruvain is totally pater. Why? Because it's still called the case of Moda B'Knas. In other words, that it appears that what Rabbi Shimon is ultimately holding is that even once Beis Din reaches a verdict, that verdict doesn't transform the award into mamon. It's still knas, and therefore ultimately Ruvain is still admitting to a knas. So therefore, the Rabbi Shimon here is saying, according to the Rabbanan, listen to this. So lididi, 3 lines are from the bottom, lididi, according to me, Rabbi Shimon says, even though the Beis Din reached a verdict, it's still called knas. Aladidachu, odu limihas heicha delo amad bedin dechi katava knasa katava. But Rabbi Shimon says, okay, Rabbanan, I understand. In the case of where Ruvain is admitting that this entire case was already decided by a Beis Din, I got it. You Rabbanan hold that now the entire award is transformed into mammon, and therefore Ruvain should be chayiv for all of these items. But at least admit to me in the case where they did not come to Beis Din, that halacha l'maisa, this is a case of Moda B'Knas, and therefore should be pater. So the Gemara says, top of Mem Gimel, Moda B'Knas pater. For Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan will say no. Ki katava boshes upegam katava. I will say, here is now we're getting to the essence of it. I will say, what are they arguing about? Let's just focus right now on case number one. Right? Case number one is Shimon comes over to Ruvain. Ruvain, you violated my daughter. Ruvain says, let's go. Ruvain says, no, I didn't. Right? Ruvain swears that he did not do it. Then Ruvain admits he violated Rachel, and now, of course, he also swore falsely. So you've got Rabbi Shimon saying that Ruvain's admission is a case of Moda B'Knas. And Moda B'Knas is pater. The Rabbanan say he's chayiv. So the Gemara says, here we go, but my kamiflagi. What are they arguing about? Rabbi said, this is so interesting. So Amar Papa, Rabbi Shimon Savar, Lo Shavik Inish Midei Dikitz, V'tava midei de lo kids. So we'll say, here's what's fascinating, because if you think about it, what are they arguing about? So we'll say, essentially what they're arguing about is like this, is when Reuven goes ahead, when Shimon, the father, confronts Reuven, what is the ikar thrust of his taina, right? What is it that he's really claiming against Reuven? So Rabbi Shimon holds that what the father of the girl, what Shimon is really claiming against Reuven, ultimately is the knas. Why? Because I will say, what's the power of the knas? What's the power of the knas? It's a defined claim. See, boshes, pegam, tsar, these are subjective amounts. So therefore, Rabbi Shimon's logic is like this. When Shimon, the father of Rachel, confronts Reuben and says, "You violated my daughter," what he's really claiming against Reuben is the knas. That's it. Why? Because lo shavik inish midi the kids, because a person is not going to go ahead and leave aside, a person is not going to leave aside something that is a quantified amount in order to pursue something that's an unquantified amount. In other words, Rabbi say, you see, tsar, pain and suffering, right? Boshes, humiliation, pegam, depreciation. These are subjective amounts. You may collect, you may not collect. How much you're going to collect. So when the father confronts Reuven and says, "You violated my daughter," what he's really claiming is the knas. So Rabbi Shimon says the knas is the dominant form of payment in this scenario. Therefore, the knas eclipses everything else. Therefore, when Reuven initially denies the claim and then subsequently admits that he did it, this becomes a case of what? Modeh b'knas. Modeh b'knas. I admit I owe the knas. And what's the halacha by modeh b'knas? Pater. V'rabbanan savri lo shavik inish midi dichi modi bei lo mifter v'tavim midi dichi modi bei mifter. The Rabbanan say no. Knas is not the ikar over here. Why is knas not the ikar? Because also see knas in the other payments. By knas, you see Shimon knows full well that Reuven could easily get out of knas. But say you can get out. It's so fascinating, right? All it requires to get out of knas is what? Right? Bimodeh. So the truth is, Shimon is not going to pursue something that he knows that Reuven could so easily get out of. Instead, what he's going to be focused on, halacha l'maaseh, is what? The pieces of payment that ultimately Reuven cannot get out of. So what are the pieces of payment that Reuven cannot get out of? Tsar, boshes, pegam, the damages. So both say, it's so fascinating. So here's what's interesting. He'll say it's also interesting that people know in general when you're pursuing damages from someone. So chances are you always run a chance of not getting everything. So the shaila becomes, in the pursuit of the damages, what is it that Shimon, the father of Rachel, is primarily pursuing? So Rabbi Shimon says he's primarily pursuing the knas, because the knas is the fixed amount. That's what I know I can collect. And therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, knas eclipses all of the mammon components, so that when Reuven admits that ultimately, again, he violated Rachel, it's a modeh b'knas case in pater. The Rabbanon will say, nah, because ultimately, again, Shimon knows that halacha l'maaseh, Reuven can get out of this just by being modeh. Therefore, halacha l'maaseh, that's not going to be the primary piece he's going to pursue. He's going to really primarily sue the mammon parts. Incredible. So, by minei, Rabbi Avina mirav Sheshes. So, Rabbi Avina asked Rav Sheshes the following question: Bas hanizon. So, we'll say. So, first of all, I'll just mention in this piece, the way we paskin, I will say, is as follows. The way we paskin is like this. Let me just read you the Rambam just very quickly. This is Rambam Hilchos, because now we're going to transition a little bit. Rambam Hilchos Shavuos Halacha Gimel. So we'll say, we want to know, who do we paskin like in this case of Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanon? Where here you have the father of the girl, Shimon, confronting Reuven, you violated my daughter. Right? Reuven says, no, I didn't. Reuven swears that he didn't, and then Reuven admits that he did it. So I both say, what happens now? Is this like Rabbi Shimon, a case of modeh b'knas and pater, or is like the Rabbanon that ultimately, again, chayiv? Now I will say, everyone's going to agree that when Reuven admits, he will be pater on the knas. Right? That everyone's going to admit. The shaila just is is he going to be chayiv to pay the rest of the payment? So the Rambam writes over here as follows. The Rambam says, "Hatoveis chavero b'davar sheish bo kinashin u'mishalim osa piatzmo shkubosh v'yanu v'yesh bo mamon shumishalim osa piatzmo v'kafar b'chol davar v'nishba harei chayim mishum shuas habigadol." Keitzad. Here's the case. Shimon says to Reuven, "You violated or you seduced my daughter." And Reuven says, "No, I didn't." And ultimately again, he swore. So we'll say the Rambam paskins that halacha l'maisa, ultimately we pass like the Rabbanon, that in these cases, although when Reuven goes ahead and admits that he violated Rachel, he will not be chayiv for the knas, he will be chayiv for the other pieces. He will be chayiv for the other pieces, and by the way, he's also chayiv for taking a false oath, right, for the shvuah. So we'll say, so bottom line, halacha l'maisa, the Rabban paskins like the Rabbanon. Fascinating. Okay, let's go back there. So Rabbi Avinu Rav Sheshes, Bas hanizones mina achin, ma'asiyah delami. Well, it's an interesting case here. If you have a daughter who is supported by her brothers. Now, let's define this case. Take a look at Rashi. Third line from the top in Rashi. Bas hanizones mina achin, shekachu tnai ksuva b'pirkin, b'non nukvin diyahavin lechi minoi, inun yahon yasvin bebeisi, umisin minichase adetilakchun leguvrin. They will say, we are going to see that one of the Tanai Ksuva, one of the conditions of the Ksuva that a woman would have written in, is she would stipulate with her husband that any daughters we have together will always be supported by the estate until they go ahead and get married. So I will say, so what this means is as follows. So let's say again, Reuven's married to Rachel, they have a daughter Leah. And they also have sons, Levi and Yehuda. So halacha l'maisa, when Reuven dies, his estate obviously is inherited by his sons. Even though the sons have inherited the estate, they have an obligation to support their sister, the daughter of Reuven, from the estate. That's halacha. So again, it's just that the daughter/sister doesn't inherit along with her brothers, but she must be supported by the estate. So bas hanizonos mina achin, ma'asiyah deha lemi. So we'll say, interestingly enough, so now let's say Rivka, the daughter, she goes out to work. Who gets her earnings? Do we say b'makom av kaimi? Do we say that maybe the brothers stand in the place of the father? Ma hasam, because we'll say now that brothers who inherited the estate kind of take on the status of the father. So just like when the father was alive, the earnings of the daughter went to the father. So maybe now that the father's dead and the brothers inherited the estate and they're obligated to support their sister, maybe the sister's earnings come to them. O Dilma, lo dami la'av. Or maybe not. The brothers aren't like the father. Hasam mididei misina, hachalav midido misina. So you both say, the father was supporting his daughter from his own money. And therefore, again, it kind of makes sense that the daughter's earnings should go to offset the costs of her support. Here, the brothers are not supporting their sister from their property. I mean, we'll say, technically speaking, it's their property because they inherited it, but it's their father's property. It's their father's property. Therefore, because of that, perhaps they should not be entitled to her earnings. Amrlei, he said to Mutini, so we learn this. Here we go. Amana nizonis minichsei somim. A widow is supported from the estate of the orphans. So now let's say again, Rachel is married. Rachel is married to Reuven. Now Reuven dies. Reuven has sons. His sons inherit the estate, but Rachel is supported from the estate. And Rachel's earnings go to Reuven's heirs. So it seems to be from here that we see that if you are supported from the estate, your earnings go to the owners of the estate. And therefore, Allah says the same thing. If the daughter is supported from the estate, her earnings will go to her brother, the inheritors of the estate. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not fair. Mi dami, al menuso lo nechale baharvacha. Bito nechale baharvacha. It could be able to say that in general, a husband doesn't need his widow to go ahead and profit. In other words, I will say, if the widow is being supported from the estate, that's fine, but then her earnings should go to the estate in order to offset the cost. But his daughter, he's happy for his daughter to profit and let the daughter keep her earnings from the estate. Keep her earnings. Is that to say that a daughter enjoys a higher status, so to speak, or I should say a more favorable status than the widow? Is that what we're saying? Asu almana eitzel habas, Asu almana eitzel habas, kibas eitzel achin b'nechasin mu'atin. So Chazal made the widow, in the case of the daughter, or I should say, the widow, the halacha, the Rabbana made the widow in her relationship with the daughter, like a daughter with her relationship with her brothers, like a sister with her brothers, when there's few assets. What does this mean? So we'll say, let's say again, father died, and left behind a very meager estate. So what's the halacha in this case? So let's listen to this. So let's say father died, left behind a very meager estate. There's only enough of an estate left to support the daughter. In that case, I will say, what do we say? Let the estate be used to support the daughter, and let the brothers yishol al psachim, which means what? Go and beg, go and collect door to door. Which is another way of saying, I will say, that if there's a very meager estate, priority is given to the support of the daughter over the inheritance of the brothers. Now, the brothers may technically be the owners of the land. In other words, they inherit title. But lamaisa, what we look at is, if there's only enough here to support the daughter, we allow the property to be used for her support and not for the brothers to be used as whatever they want. So you see from here that the daughter enjoys a certain elevated status over her brothers. Af amana itzlabas. So to when it comes to the widow by the daughter, what's the halacha? If there's only enough of an estate to support either the widow or the daughter, what's the halacha? Amana nizonis va'abas tishal psachim. The widow is supported, and let the daughter go out and collect door to door. Right? So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that the widow enjoys an elevated status over the daughter. If that's the case, then if we're going to say that the widow's earnings go to the estate, certainly the daughter's earnings should go to the estate. To which the Gemara says, no. Le'inyan zilusa almanasu adifale, le'inyan harvacha bita adifa. It was two different things. When it comes to covet, ultimately, again, the husband will give more covet to his widow than he will give to his daughter. So if it's a question of who's going to have to go out and beg, we'd rather the daughter do that, the husband would rather the daughter do that than the widow. When it comes to profiting, a father has a greater vested interest in his daughter profiting than his widow. So therefore, you can make the distinction that when the widow is supported by the estate, her earnings go to the estate. When the daughter is supported by the estate, perhaps she could keep her own earnings. So massive, Rav Yosef, Maisi Adam Mitziasa, Afal Pishalo Gafsa, Meisa'av Harehein Shal Achen. So we'll say this is now the Mishnah. This is our Mishnah. Right? So we'll say, what did we learn in our Mishnah? What did our Mishnah? That Allah Chalamaisa, a girl, Maisi Adam, her earnings, Umitzias, and anything she finds, even though the father did not collect them, right? Ultimately, again, during his lifetime, Harehein Shal Achen. When the father dies, they pass through to the brothers as inheritance. Taima de b'chayav. Now, the only reason why in the Mishnah the father is entitled to these earnings is because they were earned during his lifetime. What can you infer from here? That anything she earns after his death, liatzma, ultimately again belong to the girl herself. My love benizonis, and are we not referring to a case where she's supported by the estate? And from here you see that a girl is permitted to keep her earnings, even if she's supported by the estate. Lo b'she'ina nizonis. No, we're talking about a case over here where what? Where she is not supported by the estate. But if she's not supported by the estate, we'll say, and her father's dead, right? In other words, obviously, we're talking about an estate. If her father's dead and she's not being supported by the estate, then of course she should be able to keep her own earnings. To which the Gemara says, we'll say, even though there's the possibility of a master to say to his servant, you have to work for me and I'm not going to support you, that's by an Eved Kinani. Because the Torah does not say the Lashon of Imach, that the Eved Kinani has to live with you. But by Eved Ivri, by a Jewish servant, where the Torah says that the Eved has to be with you, imach, lo. Others will say, by an Eved Ivri, I have an obligation to support him. So therefore, again, I'm sorry. So we'll say, all the more so, daughter, that Allah father cannot say to his daughter, give me your earnings and I will not support you. Oh, what are we referring to over here? We'll say additional earnings. Additional earnings. So it's actually very interesting that halacha l'maisa, what the Gemara just pointing out here as a side point, that halacha l'maisa, even if a father is not supporting his daughter, then in that case he would not be entitled to her earnings, but any additional amounts that she would make above and beyond that which is needed for her support would go to her father, even if he is not supporting her. An interesting halacha. Okay, so Amarava. So we'll say, so now remember again, so we're still, Amarava, sorry. So we'll say, so remember, I want to point out, we still have our fundamental question, which is that halacha l'maisa, if a girl is being supported, father died, left behind an estate. Remember again, who inherits the estate? The brothers, the sons, right? Now, but one of the conditions of the ksuva is that daughter, is supported by the estate of her late father. Now what we're trying to figure out is what? Halacha l'maisa, now she's going out, she's earning money. Who gets the earnings? Does she keep her own earnings, or do we say that essentially her brothers stand in the place of her father, just as her father would have acquired her earnings, so too do the brothers? We haven't answered that yet. Amar Rava. Rava says, Gavra Rabba Rav Yosef lo yad diika hadafa v'kam osif tiyufta. So did a great man like Rav Yosef not know this answer of hadafa, of additional earnings? And he gave a different answer. Amar Rava Rav Yosef masnisin gufa kashila. Rav Yosef was bothered by the Mishnah. What's the problem? Diktani maisiyadel umitziasa afa bishla gavsa. So let's remember again, going back to our Mishnah that we had in yesterday's daf. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, a girl's earnings and mitziyasa. We'll say, what does mitziyasa mean? Mitziyasa means an object that she found goes to the father. Afa bishla gavsa. Even though the father has not yet collected those items, ultimately, again, if they are anything she earns or anything she has found, or mitziyasa, even though she has not yet collected them, become the property of the father. To which the Gemara says, mitziyasa miman gavya. I don't understand. So will say, I understand the case of earnings that have not been collected. Right? What's the case of earnings that haven't been collected? She worked, but she hasn't been paid. So the Mishnah essentially says that if a girl worked, but she hasn't been paid, those earnings belong to her father, even though she has not yet collected them. Why? Because she's earned them. In other words, that the father is entitled to any earnings that his daughter has already earned, even if she has not collected. But I will say, what does it mean that he's entitled to something she found, but has not collected? What does that mean? In other words, if you haven't collected it, so I'll say, in other words, she sees $100 bill on the ground. So I understand, if she picks it up, who does that belong to? Her father. But if she sees $100 bill on the ground, but hasn't collected it, then how would the father have any entitlement to that? So I'll say, listen to this. Ela lav hakim, what it means to say. I'll say, this is actually quite fascinating. Here we go. My siyadea kimitziyasa. Her earnings are just like an item that she finds. Just like I will say, what? If she finds an object, if she finds something during the lifetime of her father, whose property does the object become? Her father's. But I will say, what happens if she finds something after the death of her father? Who does that belong to? The girl herself. So too, earnings are the same thing. Rabbi say, here we have it. So the Gemara says, none of the Mishnah is coming to teach you, trying to equate the halachos of earnings and findings. Just like if she finds something during the lifetime of her father, the object becomes her father's. And if she finds something after her father died, she keeps it herself. Earnings are the same way. Any money she earned during the lifetime of her father becomes the possession of her father. but any earnings that she earns after the death of her father ultimately, again, are kept by her. I will say it sounds like even what? Even if she's being supported by the estate. So the Gemara says, we'll see that in just a moment. If a daughter is supported, a girl is supported by her brothers, and others from the estate that the brothers inherited, she keeps her earnings. She keeps her earnings. What's the reason? Both say the pasuk we're talking about avodim, eved kinani, right? Gentile servants. They will be inherited to your sons after you. Osam libnechem v'lo b'nosechem v'lo b'nosechem nechem. Avodim are inherited by your sons, but your daughters are not inherited by your sons. Meaning what? Magid she'ein adam morish zechus bito libno. The Both say teaches us that whatever rights a father has in his daughter are not passed down to his sons. So we'll say, here it is. This is the conclusion of the sugya. That halacha l'maisa, and this is really it, that any rights a father has in his daughters are not passed down to the sons. And therefore, even though the sons kind of stand in the place of their father, so to speak, and that now they're running the estate, they own the estate, halacha, and now they're obligated to support their sister, the father does not have, the brothers do not have any rights to their sister's earnings. Incredible. So Maskif, I will say, and that we're going to see, that indeed is the halacha. I'll just tell you it now. That indeed is the halacha l'maisa. The Rambam paskins in Hilchos Ishus, Parak Yud Taz halacha Yud, mitnoi ksuva, shetziena habanos nizonos minichse avin achar moso, ad sheis aso shei bagru. So we'll say halacha l'maisa, we're going to see one of the, this is actually Kesuvos, we're going to see this. One of the conditions in the Kesuva is that when the father dies, a daughter is supported from the estate of her father until either she has irisin or becomes a bogeres. But halacha l'maisa, when she is supported from her father's estate after he dies, maisi adea umitzi asa la'atzma. The girl keeps her earnings and she keeps anything she finds, lo la'achim. Does not go to her brothers. So we'll say that's how he paskin halacha l'maisa. So even though, again, during the lifetime of the father, he is entitled to her earnings if he's supporting her. He's entitled to that which she finds. That right is not inherited to the brothers, and therefore when she's supported by the estate, she keeps her earnings and she keeps anything she finds. Incredible. Maskif la rabba rizikasha ve'imba bepitui. Habas uknosos v'chalas v'chasam medaber. Maybe the pasuk is talking about again the penalty payments. The penalty payments that we're talking about, right? I shouldn't say. Well, right. Ve'ema pitoy habas uknosos v'chalas v'chasam medaber. Maybe it's talking about penalty payments and any damages. Maybe that's what it's referring to. Look at Rashi. Ve'ema 4 lines from the bottom. Ve'ema pitoy habas uknosos the onis v'chalas v'chasam medaber v'maisi adel t'midi d'shriach v'chasri be'mamona. So say, maybe when the Torah says that the rights of the father are not inherited by the brothers, maybe that's referring to, like, in the case of where she's seduced or violated, it refers to the knas, the tsar, the boshes, the pegam, the ripoy, things like that. Maybe that's not inherited, maybe that's not acquired by the brothers. But earnings are. To which the Gemara says, Chavalos tsara de gufanenu. We'll say, of course, the brothers don't get tsar, boshes, pegam, ripoy. Why? Because tsar ultimately represents damages done to her body, pain and suffering that she experienced. Of course, she's going to keep that herself. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, shepatza. Perhaps we're talking about a case where I'll say where halacha l'maisa she was injured on her face, in which case again that's not simply a tzara de gufa, but that also represents a potential pigam, a potential diminution in her value. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rab Masta, Amar Rav, Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Masta, Amar Rav, Bas hanizonis mina achin, ma'isiyadeh liatzma. Well, so here it is again. When a daughter is supported from the brothers, which means when it means she's supported from her brothers, what it means is that ultimately the brothers inherited the estate. And now she is being supported from that estate. She keeps her earnings. Talking about an Eved Kinani. You shall pass down your Eved Kinani to your sons after you as a form of inheritance. And we darshan from that, Osam libnechem. It's only avadim who are inherited by one's sons. But your rights, a father's rights in his daughters, are not inherited by the sons. Magid she'ein adam morish zuchus bito libno teaches us that a father does not go ahead and bequeath the rights of his daughters to his sons. So we'll say, therefore, again, the same thing we just said before. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, even though the daughter is being supported from the estate, she keeps her earnings for herself. Amrle avimi bar papi shakud amra. So avimi bar papi said shakud. Rabbi says shakud means the diligent one, right? The stark one. He said this halacha. So the Gemara says shakud man. Who's the shakud? Rabbi say Shmuel. So Shmuel, that's they used to call Shmuel. They used to call Shmuel the shakud, right? Shmuel the sharp one. So one said, but Shmuel didn't say this. Rav Amra, but Rav said this. Ema af shakud amra. Even the sharp one said it. Amar mar bar amemar Rabashi. Hachi aminar doi hilchasa kavase derav sheshes. To which the Gemara says, Ravashi amar hilchasa kavase derav, the hilchasa kavase derav. And we'll say that is indeed how we pass in halacha l'maisa. That remember now, Rav Sheshes felt that halacha l'maisa, that we learn our daughter from almana. That was Rav Sheshes's position. Rav Sheshes wanted to say the same way that an almana, when she is separated from the estate, her earnings go to the estate. So to daughter, when she is supported by the estate, her earnings go to the estate. That was Rav Sheshes. Rav said no. Almana is different. Because again, a man wants his almana to be taken care of, but he does not need her to financially profit. A daughter, he's happy if the daughter puts away some money in the bank. And Abba says, we just saw before in the Rambam, halacha said that's how he paskin. So we'll say two important takeaways from here. Number one, there's a t'nai in the ksuva, and we're going to see this sugya. There is a condition in the ksuva that ultimately, again, promises support of the daughter, both during the lifetime of her father as well as in the event of death or divorce. I will say it's an important t'nai. Why? Because remember, when the father dies, a daughter doesn't inherit if there are sons. So ultimately, again, sons inherit the entire property. But the t'nai ksuva ensures that daughter will still be supported from the estate. That's number one. And number two, we paskin that even when she is supported by the estate, anything she finds belongs to her. And ultimately, again, any earnings belong to her as well. Incredible. Says the Mishnah Bosai, Hama Ares, interesting case. Hama Ares says, Bito Vigirsha. Bosai, listen to this. A father goes ahead and marries off his daughter in Erison. Hama Ares says, Bito Vigirsha. But then her husband divorces her from Erison. Then the father marries her off a second time. Irsa Vinis Armala. Now he marries her off a second time. Husband number two, right? Husband number two. And ultimately, again, in this case, she's widowed. So a case number, father married her off to Ruvain. She was divorced. Ruvain divorced her from Erison. Father marries her off to Shimon. Shimon dies from Erison. What's the halacha? Ksuvasa shelo. We'll say in this case, ultimately, again, the ksuva belongs to the father. We'll say very interesting because obviously the Mishnah is coming from a perspective that there's a ksuva as of when? As of Erison. Okay, we're going to talk about this. So ksuvasa shel avia. Look at Rashi. So the Gemara says ksuvasa shel av ksuva shigova mishnei erusin halalu kasav yish ksuva larusa beinarus akatnas kamar. So first of all, a couple of things we're presupposing. Number one, the girl in question obviously is still either a katana or an arus or a nara. That's why she can be married off by her father. Number two, I will say when the Mishnah says that the ksuva belongs to the father, which ksuva are we referring to? There's two ksuvas over here. There's ksuva for marriage number one to Reuven, ksuva for marriage number two to Shimon. So father gets both those ksuvas. Number three, we're assuming that there is a ksuva obligation from Erison and on. We'll talk about all those things. Next, his siya vigirsha siya vinis armala. It was like case number two. Case number two is ultimately again where halacha l'maisa. Father married her off to Ruvain. She has nisuin with Ruvain. And then what happens? He divorces her. Then he divorces her. He marries her off again to Shimon. She has nisuin with Shimon. Now she's widowed. Ksuvasa shela. In these cases, halacha l'maisa what? Both of her ksuvas belong to her, belong to the girl. Now what's the logic? Now look at Rashi. Ksuvasa shela. Temishehesiya paka rishusa ubasar govaina azlinan vigovaina. Suppose here's the difference in this case. Once a girl has nisuin, ultimately, again, her father no longer has any rights in her. Right? Her father no longer has any rights in her. So therefore, we look at Rashi, the Mishiyasiya Paka Rishuso, Ubasar Govaina Azlinon. Once the father marries her off in nisuin, he no longer has any rights in her. And I will say, when it comes to ksuva entitlement, we look at the time of collection. The Govaina Basar Hachiyu, and therefore again, collection here took place after nisuin. And after nisuin, ultimately, father no longer has any rights. So even though we said in the first case that there's a ksuva entitlement already as of erisin, we look at over here, when is the ksuva collected? The ksuva is collected, about say, after nisuin in these cases. Therefore, after nisuin, the father no longer has any right in his daughter, and therefore, in both of these cases, the ksuva will be given to the girl. Fine. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Harishon Shalav. Rabbi Yehuda says, from the first marriage, the ksuva, from the marriage to Ruvain, the ksuva goes to the father. From the second marriage, the ksuva will ultimately go to the girl. So the Gemara says, Shalav. Amrulo Mishiyasiya Ein Lav Yerushaspa. The Chazal argued on this, and they said to Rabbi Yehuda, they said Rabbi Yehuda, not true, because once the father marries off his daughter, he no longer has any rights in her. Good. Says the Gemara, interesting. Taima Desiya V'Gersha Sivin Esaran. Now, if you take a look at the cases, how are the cases set up, Rabosai? The cases now remember. First part of the Mishnah is talking about just erisin with two husbands. Second part of the Mishnah is talking about with nisun with two husbands. But they both follow the same model. What's the same model? She's divorced from the first marriage and what? Widowed from the second. Why don't you just make it widowed from both marriages? Listen to this. If she were to be widowed twice, we would not let her get married again. Why not? The Gemara says, Rabosai, there's a concept that when a woman is married multiple times and her husband dies, she's called the katlanis. Ultimately, again, we assume that maybe there's something wrong with this woman, that all of her husbands are dying. So the Maisi and Rabosai, there is a shaila, we'll talk about the sugya, there's machlokas, does the woman become a katlanis after two dead husbands or 3 dead husbands? The Gemara says, you see from here that our Mishnah is paskening that it's after 2 dead husbands. That's why, again, we set up the cases of divorce and death and not 2 cases of death. So we'll say, just as an aside, and the Mishnah often does this, the Mishnah sometimes teaches us a lesson implicitly. So by setting up this case as divorce and death, we paskin like Rebbe. Rebbe says that chazaka is established after 2 times, and therefore, if this woman were to have 2 dead husbands, ultimately, again, that would solidify her identity as a katlonis, and she would not be permitted to marry a 3rd time. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Rishon Shalav. So Rabbi Yehuda says, now remember, Rabbi Yehuda held that halacha l'maisa in the first case, right? So remember again, it's case number 2, right? Father marries off his daughter to Ruvain, right? Nisuin. Ruvain divorces her, then he marries her off to Shimon, Nisuin, Shimon dies. Rabbi Yehuda says the first ksuv from the first marriage belongs to the father. To which the Gemara says, my time Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yosef Tabayu, Hoil Umishas Irisin Zacha Bahen Ha'av. I will say ultimately why? Because they hold that the father acquired the rights in the ksuva from the times of Irisin. So we'll say, we'll have to stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Yahrzeit Hashem with this discussion further tomorrow. But I will say, what essentially we're going to get into is a fundamental machlokes halacha l'maisa as to what point in time the father becomes entitled to the ksuva of his daughter. We'll stop here, pick up with that discussion in Yahrzeit Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach.